Hello everybody, my name is Don Peterson. This is the Swing Factory Golf Show. I'm sitting here with my co-host Justin Masinko.
How you doing, Don?
Good, and want to thank all of you for tuning in. We've got a lot of you coming back and watching the show now, and we're starting to pick up interest, and that's all good.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun shooting these shows.
Right.
It's been great.
And Justin and I, we talk all day. We teach and we talk and we share things. And he was telling me the other day about sequencing, and you said you thought that was...
Yeah, that's probably got to be, in my opinion, the most important attribute a golfer can have.
Yeah.
As far as being a good golfer, often you see high handicap amateurs, they'll have really poor sequencing, and then a good golfer will have great sequencing. And it's really the only thing that every single tour player has in common.
Right.
Their sequencing might be a little different, but it's all pretty good.
Right. And I think with the advent of biomechanics, right, and all these motion, we've got the Swing Guru, which is uses the Xbox Connect, and you've got that infrared technology that is able to track your shoulders and your hips, and you can see all. We've got K-Vest, and we've got motion. Was it 4D motion? There's a whole bunch of programs or applications where you can track shoulders and hips and see the sequencing.
And it gives you really good data. So all these pieces of technology, they give you that 3D picture of the guy swinging on the, which is cool. But the real good stuff you get from that data is the graphs you get from it. So you'll get a little graph that'll tell you how fast your hips fired first, and then your torso, and then that sort of thing, and that's pretty valuable. Of course, you don't really need that technology when you watch someone swing and see them hit the ball a lot shorter than they probably should.
Right. What about you were talking about, we've talked about the weightlifting and everything, and sequencing and weightlifting. I know you know a lot about that.
Right.
So it's important in other sports like weightlifting. It's important in karate. So why don't you talk about weightlifting?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's important in every rotary motion. We talk about that. So weightlifting aside, anytime you're throwing, so obviously. Any pitcher, if you're a baseball pitcher, that's something you should care about. You should care about your sequencing. Obviously anything you're swinging. So tennis players, hockey players, even like bowling. I'm sure bowlers care about it, even though that's a little different. I don't know if they're trying to heave it as fast as they possibly can or something. But getting a little off track, and then. I know Olympic weightlifters care about stuff like that. Because just to clarify, the Olympic weightlifting is the snatch and the clean and jerk. Essentially, when you take the bar and you throw it overhead, that's the Olympic lifts. And then the power lifts is squat, bench, and deadlift. And the sequencing isn't as important there as it is in the Olympic lifts. Because they're relatively complex. You just need to make sure you have good motor patterns to move weight efficiently.
Well, I remember I grew up with like everyone else, high school buddies and things, and I remember I had this friend of mine. And he was 5'5", and he was about 150 pounds, but he was built like a brick. I mean, he was really solidly built, and he and his buddies. I wasn't there, but he and his buddies busted in on a college frat party one night. And a whole bunch of guys were sitting around drinking beer. Well, it happened to be the football team. So you got 220, 260, 280 pound guys, and they're lifting weights. Right? So they happened to be doing a thing where they're just lifting with one arm, trying to put it up over their head. So all these 220, 30, 40, 50 pound guys were trying to put about 100, 120 pounds over their head, right? And a couple of them were struggling, and some of them could do it. Well, this little 5'5" guy, his name was Brad. I won't give his last name out, but he went over there and he says, "Let me try." Well, they all laughed and chuckled. Yeah, let him try. So he was having a beer or whatever. So he goes over there, and they put the weight down to like 100 because they had it up to around 130 or something.
Okay.
So they put it down to 100.
It's really darn heavy.
So he just
For one arm.
he just grabbed it and threw it up over his head like it was nothing. And he says, put more weight on. So he put 120 pounds on there and he threw it up over his head. All right. So this guy's only weighs like 140, 150 pounds.
Yeah.
And then they put 140 pounds on there and he threw it up over his head with one arm.
Yeah.
So it was all technique.
Right.
He had strength too, and he had very strong hands and arms. Right?
Yeah, when you talk about that lift, that sounds like a big grip strength thing.
Right.
So he probably had a lot of grip strength, but
right. So it's fascinating. I mean, all these guys were floored. I mean, he actually could beat the strong guys, the big strong guys. Right. But it was technique, and I think sequencing had a lot to do with it because he had to be able to sequence all of that weight.
Yep.
Get his legs in his back to fire at the right time, throw that weight in the air, and then bounce underneath of it to get it airborne.
Yeah, I've heard Olympic lifting coaches talk about you kind of want to be patient off the floor, meaning you don't want to just jerk the bar up. So you don't want to jerk the bar up with your arms. You want to use your legs.
Right.
So that's pretty similar. And then
he was only 5'5", so he didn't have to lift it too far up off the ground like the other guys did.
That's a good point too. It's funny. Technique plays a huge. That just proves that technique plays a huge role in force output.
Right. Right.
And as much as anything. So.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. You brought that up, and and another thing is, I'm sure he was probably just a strong kid.
He was a good athlete. I mean, he played all the different sports, and he had a chip on his shoulder.
Right.
He's 5'8", he had a little Napoleon complex.
right. Yeah.
But
that's great.
Good competitor.
Yeah. But that's something, as far as swing sequence goes, that's something I've always admired about your swing.
Yeah.
I think that's where you get a lot of your distance from.
Yeah, I would agree. And I wanted to talk about this show too because the sequencing thing. I'm reading all the blogs, and you try to follow the education of the golf community that we have, and the teachers, and there's so many different viewpoints out there.
Right.
And it seems to me like everybody's talking about how important sequencing is in the golf swing, but they're really talking about downswing.
Right.
They want you to fire correctly on the downswing, and I hear it all the time. But not one of these teachers talks about how important sequencing is on the backswing. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you can take it back any way you want to. Lift it with your hands, roll your wrists. You can turn your shoulders a little, turn your shoulders a lot. Yeah. It's like you can take it back any way you want to. Yeah. You can lean left or you can load right, but you got to have it perfect on the downswing, right? So the sequence has to be perfect on the downswing, but the backswing you can do anything you want to. And it kind of blows my mind that nobody's talking about sequencing on the backswing. And see, that's where, when I'm working with people, the way I get people to be more efficient on their backswing is teach them proper sequencing.
Right.
So we could go all day long about what is proper sequencing, but it's not any different than it is on the downswing.
Yeah.
So if you're coming from the ground up on the downswing, coming through the bigger muscles of your hips and your lower back and your torso, if that's proper sequencing on the downswing, then I have to agree, or I'd have to believe that that's the proper sequencing on the backswing as well.
Right. And we talk about how important it is to get in a good backswing position, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get in positions, and I guess technically impact is a position. So when you're going, when you talk about sequencing in the downswing, that's just the proper way to get into a position. So having good sequencing can get you into a good top position.
Right.
And it's something that, like, the context of an overall swing is just really important, And if you don't have good sequencing on the backswing, then something could probably go wrong on the downswing.
Well, I think, and go back, Ben Hogan made a comment years ago, and he said that you're a victim of your own backswing. So if you make a good backswing, it's like, okay, that's good. Then you're a victim of a great backswing, so you have a good downswing.
Yeah.
But if you have a bad backswing, then you're a victim of probably a poor downswing because of that. So, my thought is, and I've always thought, when you throw a golf club, I always thought of the golf swing as a throwing motion. It's just a underarm or sidearm throwing motion, and you throw the golf club head into the back of the ball.
Yeah.
And it's just like a pitcher. If you can do it real accurately, you can hit accurate golf shots.
Right.
If you can do it real powerfully, you can hit long golf shots. Okay, but if you do both, then you're one of the better players in the world. Okay, so if the downswing is an underhand throwing motion, then why wouldn't the backswing be kind of a throwing motion? I always teach my students, I want them to feel like they're tossing the club back.
Right.
But you toss it back using your bigger muscles.
Yeah.
You start with from the ground up through your core, and you have some extension. You know, you have some width in your golf swing. But if you give the motion proper sequencing on the backswing, just like you do on the downswing, then the club kind of finds the correct positions, I feel.
Yeah.
And you have more of a fluid motion as well.
You know, and that's how we get our width, and that's how we get our distance.
That's right.
You know,
That's right.
so
It's hard to explain everything on a talk show.
right.
And that's why we're not going to delve into all that. You know, it takes a little bit more. I guess you need to go watch some of our videos to understand a little bit what we're talking about. But yeah, it always kind of gets my goat a little bit to hear all these guys talk about sequencing and they never mention the backswing.
Right.
So
Now, so we talk about what the backswing could potentially get to, like good sequencing.
yeah,
Now, I think we failed to mention why everybody talks about sequencing in the downswing. And I think the two biggest things it gives you is if you have good sequencing, one, it gives you more power.
Yep.
That's the obvious one. If you fire with your hips, then your torso, then your arms, then the club, it creates sort of a slingshot effect,
right.
which makes the club move fastest while it's in the impact position. And, you know, that's how, when you see a really small guy hit the ball really far, that's what's happening there. They have, they create a lot of lag. And now we've talked about, we think you can over lag it. You can lag it too much where accuracy becomes a problem, contact becomes a problem. But having a lot of lag can let you hit the ball far.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So.
And then the other thing it does is it allows the club to sort of shallow out and fall into plane.
Right.
And, you know, so having good sequencing also helps with contact and accuracy for that reason.
Right. I think the other thing is that I see, and you know, if your sequencing is out of order, I see people who are inefficient. Okay, when you're inefficient, you have to work harder.
Right.
And I had a kid in here the other day, and he's just so out of sequence. He just lifted his arms right away, and so he's so out of sequence. He was working really hard.
Right.
Now, this kid was talented and could hit the ball hard.
Yeah.
So he had good distance, and you know, but it was so out of sequence. And I told him, I said, you know, your hips, you know, when I watch someone come down and their hips basically stop. So they start down and their hips stop, then their arms just keep going. If you watch video and the arms are going right past the hips and the hips are still, and then you're going to see people jump off the ground. And you see people jump off the ground, in my opinion, their sequencing was a little bit off.
Right.
And this is where I'm waiting for the right science to come along, because I don't think getting airborne with your left foot or getting airborne with both feet is proper, most efficient motion or proper sequencing.
What's happening is, you know, obviously you're compensating for a steep position when you jump.
I think so. That's what I think.
That's what you're doing.
I think the club is somewhat out of position, and that's why you jump, is because you're trying to pull the club into the right position and get the club to release squarely. And you can do that. I mean, Justin Thomas is a perfect example. The guy gets airborne a lot of his shots.
Bubba Watson.
And Bubba Watson. So there's some people that do it and can do it consistently.
However, we don't like seeing it.
Well, I think it's hard to teach that.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't teach someone to jump because Bubba Watson does it.
Right.
I wouldn't teach someone to jump because Justin Thomas does it.
Right.
Right? But when I see Ben Hogan swing a golf club, I would teach people to do what he's doing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of teachers that would argue with me about that. Oh, Ben Hogan was he's the only one who could swing like that because he was left-handed, that's another argument you can make. I don't think he was left-handed. I think he was right-handed. He learned to play with a left-handed club when he was a caddy.
Yeah.
And the rumor went around that he's left-handed, but in reality he was right-handed. So he switched to right-handed when when he was able to get a right-handed club.
Yeah, I think he was right. The way he used his right arm in the swing,
Yeah.
there's no way he wasn't a dominant righty thrower.
Yeah, he threw with his hips.
Yeah.
That was evident. He threw really hard with his hips. Hogan opened his hips. Right heel was off the ground, but his left foot was firmly planted on every swing. You can go
Right,
to YouTube.
and that's something we should clarify. When we say feet on the ground, that doesn't mean the left heel isn't rising. It doesn't mean that things aren't
On the
turning.
backswing, you mean?
But
Backswing, yeah.
we're talking about through impact position.
Right.
And we see a lot of people, jump off the ground and kind of scoot backwards.
Right.
And it creates a little bit more room for a steep shaft to come in and make solid contact. It's not efficient.
Right. I think those guys are firing with their shoulders.
Right.
They're firing with their shoulders or they're pulling with their arms, one of the two. And that's poor sequencing, right? So, and that's what, it's kind of funny if we get into this biotechnology and motion, studying the motion and everything, some of these weird swings that we were talking about. What was that amateur's name that you were talking about?
Matthew Wolf.
Yeah, so Matthew Wolf, I mean, if you looked at his sequencing, it's going to be all wrong. Right? So is he going to want to change his swing to get more efficient sequencing?
Right.
Who knows? Who knows what will happen?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying his sequencing would be wrong, because I don't think he's pulling down with his arms or anything like that. I think his hips are going really far early. It wouldn't be ideal, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'd say that sequencing is it's kind of like a form of efficiency. So I wouldn't really say that his golf swing's super efficient. Even though I don't know his golf swing too well, I've only seen that little clip of it.
Well, there was a study done years ago at Sentinel Hospital, and that was the one where they attached, some sort of wires to the muscles, and they had all the muscles, so they could tell which
Something
muscles
you could do with a K-vest,
muscles fired, and it was interesting how their findings were that the first thing that happened in the golf swing was relaxation of muscles in the right hip.
Yeah.
Which I found fascinating, because that means that you were probably leaning into your right hip.
Right.
So that meant that the swing started from the ground, and you actually set weight in your right hip to start the golf swing, which I thought was fascinating.
Right. Yeah, that's cool.
And again, I think if you have all of these sensors and you look at someone like Wolf, I think he's going to be firing with muscles up in his shoulders and arms earlier than he should be. Yeah. And it's based on having the club in that weird position at the top of the swing.
Yeah, he just lets it kind of fall. And it's interesting for sure.
Yeah.
And I talk about that a lot with, I think a couple of years back, the British College of Sports Medicine did a EMG activation study, that's similar to what you're talking about and they were talking about what muscles you use most in the golf swing. Well, turned out you use every muscle in the golf swing. That's not a surprise to us. It's a very complex movement. But if you had to rank which muscles you use most down through impact, it's your hamstrings, your butt, and your lower back, and your posterior chain. So your hips. So that's what we're finding out is the hips are, everything initiates from the hips. And what's interesting about it is when you teach it, I think I've heard you and we've talked about this before. You don't necessarily teach to go with. You kind of want the feeling to be that your whole body's turning. You're just using your big muscles. You use the term core a lot. You use your core muscles to turn with everything all at once.
Right.
Obviously we know that science is telling us that everything's firing separately, but do you mind talking a little bit about how when you teach, you're teaching for everything to go as one?
That's interesting that you said that, because I try to tell people during my lessons what actually happens, but then you have to talk about what some people feel happens. Or, like I know during a golf swing, if I fire my hips, I'm not a rigid mechanical robot. So when I fire my hips, everything doesn't exactly move back with me at one time. There's a little bit of lag from my arms.
Yeah.
But I might not feel like I'm lagging my arms.
Right.
Now I did practice when I was a kid in order to learn how to use my hips properly. I felt like I went back and I started trying to leave the club. And,
Yeah.
Hogan talked about suspending the club at the top of the swing. So I felt like I left my arms behind sometimes.
Right.
Now, if your arms are behind you and you leave them behind, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
But if your arms are in front and you just feel like you leave them behind, what are you actually feeling? Are you feeling the club fall behind? The club shaft fall behind? Are you feeling your lag in your wrists? I mean, everybody feels things differently. So that's a hard one.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the student and the vocabulary you use.
Right.
Sometimes I've told people to try to leave or lag or, let it fall behind and got the complete wrong result.
Yeah. So
you have to talk about, do you want the arms to lag behind? Do you want the club to lag behind? The club head to fall behind? To create the lag, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Yeah, I try to get my arms to move with my chest with most of my students, upper arms and elbows, and you're going to have some play. Sometimes I try to get people. I do an Elvis Presley drill where I try to get people to sling their hips back and forth without their shoulders moving.
Right. That's
just to get a feeling of what it feels like to actually start with the hips and not start with
we
the
actually
shoulders.
did that in TPI. TPI created something like that. It's called the pelvic rotation test.
Yeah.
You call it the Elvis.
Elvis
That's
Presley
funny.
drill.
That's funny. But and I find a lot of times with teaching it could be difficult because saying something like, "Oh, use your hips," it's pretty ambiguous. It's kind of like, all right, what do I do? Use my hips. So what I like to do is if someone's right-handed, I like to say, imagine there's a string, attached to your right hip, right here, or your left hip, not your right hip. Imagine I was behind you and I was just tugging on it, and that's how you're supposed to sling open, and then your arms are supposed to hang back and just be rope and sling around. We talked about the pen and the rubber band. That's it, and I find that analogy works pretty well because you're not saying use your hips. It's not. When you say use these muscle parts that you don't think of using in everyday life, you just use them.
Right.
It could be kind of difficult to comprehend.
I think with most amateurs, and those of you who are watching this show, if you want to work on getting proper sequencing, what I found as a teaching pro is most of the time people swing with their arms and shoulders, predominantly earlier than their hips.
Right.
So you've got to do one of two things. If I ask you to stop using your shoulders and your arms, I'm telling you to swing with no power. Because when you swing, if you're swinging incorrectly with your shoulders and arms, that's your power.
Yeah.
So if I say, oh, relax, don't swing hard with your shoulders, now you have no power. So if I'm going to take your power away, then I have to give it to you. I have to give you back some power. So I have to teach you how to use your hips correctly. And that might not happen until I teach you how to coil correctly on the backswing.
Exactly.
So if I'm going to take power away, I have to show you how to replace the power. So that's part of the struggle in teaching is when you change things, you then have to, there's a give and take.
Right.
You got to show someone where they're going. You got to give them the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
So I remember when I took some lessons from David Ledbetter, he wanted to shorten my swing, and he had me extend my arms out, and I was working on extension. My swing felt like it was waist high at best.
Right.
I remember swinging so hard from waist high. I'd get back there and I'd just go so hard because I felt like I was powerless. But what happened was I felt like I started accelerating my hips harder because I didn't have a very long backswing.
Yeah.
I started accelerating my hips harder and harder and harder. And I was hitting the ball really, really far by taking it back really, really short.
Right.
And I remember thinking to myself, man, I'm swinging out of my shoes, trying to get the club trying to get as much power as I felt like I had going back.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But it surprised me that the ball was going further.
Yeah.
When I was going shorter with my
and
swing.
you were probably swinging in, what we say straighter lines. You probably maybe before you were across the line a little bit and you kind of straighter and shortened up a little bit, and so. I feel like that probably helps with a little bit of distance as well.
Right.
So why do you think it is that amateurs struggle with sequencing so much?
Well, I think they get started wrong, and I think with the ball on the ground, there's a tremendous amount desire to lift. People
Right.
want to lift. When you lift, you're already out of sequence.
Yeah.
So now you have to try to get back into sequence, and that means accelerate with your shoulders or accelerate with your arms. Most amateurs have a hard time getting the face to open and close properly because they have a poor grip.
Right.
So there's all kinds of factors, unfortunately, and that's part of the problem with the golf swing.
Right.
Is that there's a lot of things that can contribute to having poor sequencing.
And it's interesting, like if what I figure out and what I remember from starting the game myself, what you think is straight back and straight through is really a loopy over the top swing. When an amateur steps up the ball and thinks they're going straight and taking it back on a straight line and taking it through on a straight line, it's just a slice swing, and that's why we see the slice so often.
And then the opposite could be said when you feel like you're looping it like crazy.
Right.
I've had people feel like they take it way outside and drop it inside.
Right.
You look at it on film and it's like a straight back and straight through.
Exactly.
So it's like, wow, that felt like a big loop, but in
Yeah.
reality, it looked like it was perfect plan.
Now, do you like that drill?
For some people,
you
yeah.
like exaggerating the loop a little bit.
I've had people work on that a lot. Yeah.
I really enjoy that drill. It gets tricky because you don't want the person to manipulate with their hands.
That's right.
You want
Or arms.
or arms.
You start getting people trying to think a loop, and all of a sudden they're moving from their shoulder.
Yeah, they think
turning
they're
around their spine.
they're doing a painting. They're just drawing right there.
Yeah.
But you gotta. The drill is to do this exaggerated loop, but make it happen with your body, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, Justin, let's take a little break here, and then we'll wrap up when we come back. Welcome back, and you're watching the Swing Factory Golf Show. And Justin and I were just talking about sequencing, and he wrote a blog not too long ago.
Yeah, it was, I think, the second one we put on the website. I actually typed
swingfactory.com / Justin. What's your blog?
Justin's golf blog.
There you go.
Yeah. So if you have any interest in reading what I have to say, go ahead. Now I've had fun doing that. Just putting my ideas on paper.
Good. So tell us about the sequencing part.
Yeah. So I wrote a whole blog called "Don't Swing Your Swing." Which is a little bit a little bit of a trigger thing because it seems like
you're
everybody
going against the grain.
Every time I turn on Golf Channel, swing your swing, swing your swing, and it's not that I don't like unique swings. I really do. We were just talking about Matt Wolff. I think that's awesome. Jim Furyk winning all these tournaments, having.
Swing your swing if you can win the U.S. Amateur. Swing your swing if you can win the U.S. Open.
Right.
But what happens if you can't win anything?
Well, what I feel like most people have is like people hear that and that phrase has good intentions. Swing your swing has good intentions, but people hear that and they're like, oh, my swing's fine. I'm gonna just go to the range and hit more golf balls. When they really probably should be making changes and making strides. People forget these guys on tour with unique swings. They still have coaches.
Yeah.
They still have coaches working on certain moves they're trying to do. I don't know if like Lee Trevino had a coach, but the point is you should always be trying to improve something. And I think one thing you should probably try to improve and constantly be working on is your sequencing.
Yeah.
We look at every unique swing that is on tour and winning tournaments and whatnot, and chances are they have really good sequencing, efficient sequencing.
Yes.
So those swings are very efficient for them.
Yeah. Well, I can't agree with you more. I mean, that's one of the things I've thought for years. I always go against the grain too.
Right.
There's a lot of coaching out there where you come in and it's like I think the coach is really afraid to make change.
Yeah.
And I remember I was told by one of my first golf professionals I worked for. He says, don't mess people up, and we talked about that in one of the other shows. So if someone comes into you and they have a unique motion, it's like if you start changing that motion. if you don't know what you're doing,
Right.
if they don't practice, because there is you have to put some of the onus on the student too.
Yeah.
If he doesn't do what you ask, or he put the time in, then there's no sense making change anyway.
Yeah.
But if someone needs to make a change, then the coach needs to know how to make that change.
Right.
And needs to give someone some direction.
Yeah.
Okay? And there is a most efficient way to swing a golf club.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's not that hard.
Right.
People look at the tour pros and they think, oh, I can't turn that much and I can't shift my weight.
Right.
I can't get my hands up to the sky.
We get the most common, oh, I'm not flexible, so I don't hit the ball far.
Right.
When really their technique stinks.
Really what you need to do is learn to be more efficient.
Right.
It's just like anything else.
Yeah. And I think the point of the term swing your swing is that it not every swing's going to look the same. And I even say in the article, my swing will never look like Tiger Woods' swing.
Right.
We're different. But
you're left-handed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're gonna look like him. Except in a mirror, maybe.
Right. If you switch it to reverse on the Huddle app.
There you go.
But it'll never look like that, and that's okay. But I can certainly take certain things from his swing and try to improve myself on them. Right. And it's one of these things where people are afraid to go get coaching because they think they're going to put all these swing thoughts in them and try to make them a robot in technique and just really technical. Yeah,
we're at the Swing Factor here. We're really motion oriented, so it's like while I work on positions and I work on technique and all that, it's more through motion. And I think if you can learn how to use we call them the structural muscles. If you learn to use the muscles that kind of your skeleton type muscles, the muscles that are attached to the bones and joints, and rather than the motor muscles. The motor muscles are like the biceps and the triceps and things. So if you can learn to swing with the correct muscles and the correct sequence, you're going to have more efficient swing motion. And it's easier. It's not harder.
Yeah.
It's easier. So that's what we try to do here, and I think that's what the majority of you out there. So if your swing doesn't swing with the right muscles and the right sequence, then chances are you can learn to do it better.
Right. And I tell people it should feel effortless.
Yes.
It should just be, you say all the time, turn.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful thing about the golf swing is it can feel really easy if you're doing it correctly.
Okay, so you heard it right here in the Swing Factory. Don't swing your swing. Especially if you shoot 105, right? All right. So if you want to lower your scores, there's probably a more efficient, better sequence that you can use that'll help you.
Right. And
so I think that's what you need to find.
It's funny. People watch that commercial with Arnold Palmer talking about.
I know. Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of.
He's like, swing your swing. I certainly did.
Yeah.
And then they shoot 105, and then they go to the driving range and ingrain bad motor patterns more. So it's just something that I think we should have talked about. And yeah. So why don't we get into like how we would improve our sequencing, like how we think, or what type of drills you like doing, or.
Well, I don't know if anybody knows what a rebounder is, but I have a rebounder here in the studio, and it's basically a trampoline that's turned a little bit sideways. And you throw medicine balls into it. There's a lot of different uses for it, but I use it to throw medicine balls. So I teach people how to throw. Basically, I have them stand there with properly weighted, and it can't be too heavy. I use one that's around 12 to 14 pounds for me, but that's because I want to keep my hands strong.
Right.
But for someone who's not as strong, maybe a 8-pounder or 10-pounder. For women and juniors, maybe 4 or 6 pound. But I'll teach them to throw and use their hips to throw. I don't have you stand there and throw it with your arms. I want you to turn and throw it with your core.
Right.
Learn to throw from the ground up. We'll do footwork drills, things like that.
Yeah.
So to me, that's teaching you sequence from the ground up, right off the bat, boom, just like that. I've had people throw Frisbees. I've had people throw, I've got a piece of rubber that's off of a tee ball, right?
Yeah.
I pull the top off of it. I have them throw that into the net.
Well, what's funny about the Frisbee is we were talking about other sports that use where sequencing is really important. I'm not about to say ultimate frisbee, but the discus in track and field.
Yeah.
That's and hammer throwers and shot putters.
Yeah.
That's really important because their sport is force output. We have all sorts of other things where that may or may not be more important than clubhead speed, but their sport is literally to move the ball as far as they can.
Right.
And if you listen to any of them or how they train, they do a lot of the med ball tosses you're talking about right here, to help improve sequence. And and these exercises can be really detrimental if you don't use sequence correctly.
Right.
Because it could just ingrain bad habits.
Right. Right. Yeah, you mentioned the pen and the rubber band, and I have a pen that I use. I just clip a rubber band underneath the clip here, and I spin it back and forth like that. And I kind of show people this is how you get speed in your golf swing is by through the rotation.
Right.
So it's like the pen represents your torso basically. Yeah. The rubber band would be like your arms, and the club flying around your torso. And if you can get your swing to work like that, it can create lots of speed and flexibility. I think if you can keep your arms kind of relaxed, people are always talking about loosey goosey, or I've heard people talk about make your arms like loose noodles, or
I say make your arms rope.
Yeah, there's been those sayings have been going around forever.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think that's good. Are you a fan of like breaking up the swing into segments almost? Like, so what I've found some success in doing is, I might have a golfer go to the top of the backswing and say, all right, let's practice, let's practice moving from here to here correctly. Yeah. And that means, you're turning open with your hips, and then you're just pausing right here.
Oh, yeah. I've broken the swing down. I've got backswing stations here in the studio. We've got downswing stations. We've got impact stations, right? Yeah. There's things where you work on a dress position. So I definitely.
I like doing it that way. That way, when you're doing a full swing all at once, there's a lot of other variables when we're only trying to work on one thing. So it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but when you're only working on one thing, there's a lot less to mess up. Right. So we could bang out a lot of reps, only doing right here to right here, in a short period of time, and ingrain a pretty good motor pattern from it. Right. Yeah. So I like doing little drills like that, where maybe you've seen me do the impact drill, where we practice the pivot and keeping that elbow tucked and stuff like that.
I developed years ago. I developed what I call a preset drill, and basically it's
the preset.
I have people cock their wrists and put the club at approximately in between knee and about thigh high. Right. And then I'll have them tuck their right elbow in. Yeah. And then without pumping their arms and without pumping their shoulders, I have them just rotate. I got a bunch of different names for things, but when I have the heels move off the ground, left heel, right heel, I call that Teeter-Totter Drill. So I'll have you go left heel up, right heel up, and then if your elbows are right in front of you and you're just kind of going back and forth, it's kind of an oscillation of your hips. Yeah. And it makes it feel like your hips are making the entire motion. Right. Moving your arms, moving the head, moving your hands. Yeah. And then when people start getting that comprehension, then you develop it into a bigger backswing, and then you get that synchronization and the perfect sequence of the club coming through.
Well, you talk about the preset drill. We see that all the time. Watch any PGA Tour event. Their pre-shot routine is they start right here. Yeah. You just see them moving their body with it. Yeah. And I think, and it's something that doesn't come overnight. A good thing a really important thing to mention is the fact that I don't want you thinking about having good sequence while you're swinging. If it's a swing thought like that, it's too late. You need to practice having good sequence and then step up to the ball and not think at all. Because when you're thinking about really complex muscles and different patterns in your downswing, you're manipulating. Right. Okay, yeah. And the best way to have a repeatable swing is when you're not thinking. It's your natural swing.
Right.
So our goal here is to just get people to have a more efficient, natural swing.
Right.
So I tell people, do all your thinking before you hit the ball. Do all your thinking before you step up, and do it in your practice swings. Then just step up and swing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, the whole purpose of training is to get yourself, I guess, so memorized. It's like you're
Right.
memorizing the feeling
Yeah.
of it, so that you just step up and let it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I think that was a really big, as far as my golf career has been a little bit shorter than yours, obviously, but that was a big breakthrough I had a couple of years ago, where I wasn't trying to manipulate my stuff or my swing while I was swinging.
right, right.
And I often forget. I've been doing it for a while now. I often forget people don't think like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
You want to wrap this thing up?
I think we ought to wrap it up. We've talked about sequencing, and I think for those of you who are more interested in some of the drills, again, go to the website, www.swingfactory.com. From there, you can go to a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. BB Golf. That's MRBBGOLF.
And then obviously we have this YouTube channel that we're on right now.
This YouTube channel
then,
for the golf show.
Yeah, my blog's on the website now.
Right.
So
Right.
we'll be continuing adding to that.
And then more shows coming up.
Yeah, you got your Instagram page.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
I'm on Instagram as well as J Masinko Golf. And I'm
Yep.
putting up stuff.
Mine's under Don Peterson Golf.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.